Photography Daily.
One of the things I said to myself at the beginning is that I will not crop my photographs. The shot that I print, the shot that goes on the screen, is the composition that I took.
Thoughts from today's guest, John Brockles. Today, following the last couple of episodes that studied life in the conflict zone, we're taking a map and a flask and slowing life down to a walking pace, which I'll return to in a moment. For a photographer who's come back to photography within what he calls retirement, though to me, it doesn't precisely feel like that. A respected graphic designer, John trained initially in photography and set himself quite the challenge with one of Kodak's finest.
I just wanted to concentrate on absolute basics, and I thought you can't really get more basic than a Brownie.
It's a methodology that stayed a constant, even years later, keeping it simple.
I'm certainly not interested in having thousands of digital options on my camera.
John Brockles is now known for his stunning work and exhibitions in and about the famous English south coast town of Brighton.
Not only have you got landscape, you've got the maritime aspect, you've got the wonderful South Downs, which are this time of year just breathtaking, and of course you've got the most vibrant street scene.
We also talk about getting on your feet and covering the miles with your camera.
I walked for, I think it was 314 kilometres, or call it 200 miles.
Another Camino camera walker, we discuss being extrovert when a lot of the time introversion is a facet we talk much about as photographers.
I chose to go there on my own deliberately because it would force me more than normal to talk to people.
We crossed the Atlantic with him to revisit a place he studied when starting out.
And it was quite fascinating. On one location in particular, a ghost town called Bodie.
I saw it, yeah.
Which I've got some of the buildings I've still got in this book, in my contact sheets, and I've almost got the same angles.
John is a documentarian, yes. A landscape photographer, yes. Definitely a landscape storyteller.
At the bottom of all of this is the aspect of storytelling, and I think that's what's driving my photography more than anything else.
Stories of life told by photographers, and today that photographer is John Brockles.
I find that I go back to some locations time and time and time again because they're never the same.
A real change of tempo today, which is what I really enjoy bringing you within the titles, and I hope you'll feel a sense of calm as John shares his story of starting again, something that he's successfully done and shared by way of books and exhibitions. Patron of the day today is Christine Bird. I'll link to her Instagram, which is christine.bird_photos, and I think we're staying on theme really with today's choice of patron, as Christine's grid shows the world at walking pace too. Observations of the flora in the wild changing by the season, and fauna, if I can count your dog Toby, who's not shy of taking the limelight. The seasonality is important to me because I'm a sucker for a grid that guides me slowly through the year. I saw something just like this made around a place I'd love to visit, Waits River, Vermont. Now, I know of the place very well, but to my shame, I can't recall or find for you the Instagram account, or perhaps it could have been Flickr, associated with this most incredible 2-year project to capture the summer turning to fall, behind that the picturesque white steepled church, so famous to pictures, and then the snow enveloping the same scene. I mean, it's something that our guest John Brockles talks about today, actually, going back again and again and again, because what's in front of your eyes may be familiar, but it's always changing, slightly, in some sense. It's never quite the same. Joining Patreon is easy, and from the price of one high street coffee per month, patrons are so important to helping maintain a future for this cast. It may sound like I say that often. I do, but I genuinely mean it. And to thank you, all patrons get to hear the extra more editions, which on Thursdays include my photographic diary essay and also the new book club. This week, I've selected a book called The Fat Baby, stories by Eugene Richards. Also in the diary piece, I'm nervous. In something I've called Dodging Bullets, which I hope isn't too clumsy considering some of the conversations I've had of late with guests, but after my excitement of getting back in the seat for my social photography and wedding work, it seems the events I'm going to are well, let's just say less than respectful for the opposition. And I think you know what I mean by that. That's tomorrow in the Diary and Book Club. Here's a question before I introduce John. Is there a piece of camera kit in a cupboard, in one of those camera bags you've not looked in for a while, or you've tucked away in a drawer? I know what you like. You're probably the same as me. It's probably a lens or a flash or even a whole camera that you just haven't used lately. For some reason, you're holding on to it. I don't know, I might need this one day. Or maybe you've forgotten you even had it. Well, now's the time to turn that old kit into cash. If you're in the US, Europe or the UK and you can spare just a few minutes, because that's all it takes, go to mpb.com. I'll link to it today, of course, in the show notes, and sell it using the simple process on the front page. You'll end up with cash, and you can either pocket that or, of course, trade on the site for kit you'd much rather have instead. Today's guest, then, is John Brockles. Now, he escaped from the colloquially named Smoke and is now a Brighton-based documentarian in terms of his photography. I think he's a storyteller in the wilds. He graduated as a professional graphic designer in 1972, and though working with plenty of photographers, didn't so much attend to his own, but he'd studied photography, he knew about it, he knew how to do it, and he's now returned to it. If I were writing the script for a local news feature, I'd be saying something along the lines of, now he's making waves in his newly adopted town, but clearly the link between the extraordinary pictures he makes of the wild waves during winter, where he lives, is far too cliche when you look at his work from around the world. I guess really today is a wonderful story about a successful reintroduction to this thing we all love, photography. John, you're a classic Kodak Brownie former owner, and proud, I know. I have one in my bathroom. I have another one somewhere else, which I think they both still work. I don't know. But in fact, you were studying photography when you used yours, and you refused to use anything else, didn't you? For a while.
Yeah.
Why was that?
I've always tended to set myself parameters or boundaries. And when I was first being technically taught about photography, I just wanted to concentrate on absolute basics. And I thought you can't really get more basic than a brownie. Also, I mean, bear in mind as a student, there's cost to be considered as well.
True.
And I just thought it would be an interesting experiment to do. And it actually, it did what I wanted it to do.
You sent me a picture, didn't you, from 1969 when you were studying, which is wonderful. A street scene. But was that on? It wasn't on that, was it?
No, that wasn't on it. I did graduate to an almost proper camera. It was taken on a very basic Kodak rangefinder camera. Or semi-rangefinder, anyway.
What was it called? The Retinette, was it?
It was a Retinette, yes.
Yeah, I think
I don't know what happened to it. I had it for years and years and years.
I think I spoke to a photographer, Charlie. I know I spoke to Charlie Phillips recently, but I think that was his camera that he came about. He came about from an American GI, I think.
Really?
At that particular time. But if you don't mind me saying that particular picture, and I will share it on the show page, has a very McCullen-esque feel to it, almost governor's feel, doesn't it? The sharp dressed man in suit, obligatory cigarette. I'll pop it on the show page today. But was that the kind of thing that you were inspired by?
What I did in the later years of when I was being taught, I would spend weekends with that camera, just walking the streets in the East End, typically. I mean, when you look back at the pictures now, it is remarkable to see. You can see the social change that's come about. It's almost impossible to believe that. Certainly I lived through that, because I wasn't aware of just how grim some people's lives were. Not far from where I was living myself. I did then really the same as I do now. I would just go out, keep my eyes open, and hopefully find a shot that would happen by chance as much as anything.
But pictures like that, John, have got this great nostalgic feel, and though you didn't know it at the time, they're incredibly important today, aren't they? Pictures like that.
that's what I feel. I'm not talking about the sort of the creative content necessarily, as the social content of the pictures. And in a recent house move, I actually found all my original 35mm negs, which I've got them here. There they all are.
Look at that, fantastic!
And I'm in the process of actually revisiting them, and I'm hoping that I'm going to put a book together about, with some of the best images that I've got there.
I was going to say, there's an exhibition or a book to come, isn't there? You come a little like former guest Albert Watson from a very strong background in design, a career that spans 4 decades for you, working with some of the most respected UK designers. But photography and your interest in it, I mean, it pretty much ran cheek by jowl with your design work, didn't it? I would have thought.
Yes, it did. Once I decided that I would follow a career in design, obviously, I'm a graphic designer by training and qualification. Inevitably, I was working with and around photographers the whole time, either commissioning photographers, depending on the type of work we were working on, art directing photographers, which initially I found really quite difficult. I think that was as much a matter of confidence. I know when I started, I thought, here am I, relatively young still, trying to sort of direct very experienced photographers. I thought, am I out of my depth? But I think with experience, confidence comes. It's definitely a process I found, very important and very, very helpful.
So as much as anything, it was a continuation of your studies of photography in some respects, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Why the choice, though, to go the design route and not the photography route?
I felt there was more potential for me as a career. I mean, it really was almost a spin a coin decision in the end. I also had the qualification in graphic design, although it included a huge amount of photographic study. I don't know, I just at that time didn't feel that was the strongest route I had to follow.
So what was happening with your photography at the time then? I assume you were still doing it.
Well, no, this is the odd thing. No, I didn't.
Okay.
Although I was working professionally with photographers on the other side of the lens, as it were, with them, I didn't actively continue my photography interest other than sort of normal family sort of photography. And I only came back to it about 10 years ago when I was planning to retire. It had always been a bugbear, to be honest, that, I didn't do more with it. And it was a very gradual process. I think, first of all, when digital cameras were first around, I was very skeptical about them. And I did put a foot in the pond, and I got a very simple Fuji digital camera, and I instantly saw the potential. But all the time that was going on, I had this. It's it's my Leica M6.
M6, right? Okay.
Analog camera.
With a healthy price tag to them these days.
Yeah. I did use it, but I didn't use it in the way that I would use it now. I didn't use it to its potential. And when I was a student, in the year above me, there was a student called Richard Pear, who later became very eminent architectural photographer in California. And we'd be in the processing washroom, say in the darkroom area, jointly processing our work. And I would see all these absolutely wonderful, wonderful quality prints floating around in the wash tank. And obviously we became friends. And I found out pretty quickly why they were technically so good. I'm not talking necessarily about the creative content, which they were extremely good. But technically, I was bowled over by what I was seeing, and he had a Leica camera. And, I was about 21 at the time, and that just planted the seed in my mind that if I ever went back to photography, I would love one day to own one of these cameras. And ultimately it did when I bought this M6.
And do you use shooting film still? I know you have an M9 and a monochrome, and that's
Yes.
how a lot of your work now, the monochrome in particular, a lot of your work is coming out of that. And we'll talk about that, the work in a moment's time. But do you shoot in film now, or are you mainly digital?
The honest answer is no.
Right.
But the caveat to that is that I'm going to. That I'm actually going back to see how far I can push what I'm able to do, certainly in processing and printing.
In terms of your work, I mean, you work pretty much in black and white now. What's the deciding factor, John? Your ambulance work, for example, there's a real mixture there, but I do note that the colour seems to come through when you're approaching portraiture or working with a person.
Yes, I would typically use colour. I do use colour very rarely now, as you said, and I would quite rightly, I would tend to use it for portraiture. I would use it for any appropriate commercial work, commissions. And the project I've recently finished, which was taken in northern Spain, I could only take one camera to shoot that project.
This is the Camino project, yeah?
Yes, I did a project on the Camino pilgrimage route in northern Spain.
So just one camera with you, which I understand because that's a fair walk.
Yeah, and if I'd taken the black and white camera, I know I would have missed an opportunity.
Yeah.
So I made a decision to take my M9, which obviously is a colour camera, and shoot in colour, which was definitely the right decision to make in that case.
So going back to the monochrome though, because I know that's a particular passion of yours using that camera. We often talk not so much about cameras, but I'm intrigued today because I've spoken to a number of photographers now who have this camera, and they say, very dangerous, Neil. Don't pick one up, because if you do, you'll not want to use another camera ever again.
Yeah, I understand what they're saying.
Is that real, or is that just nonsense passion talking?
Depends on who you're talking to, doesn't it? It's certainly not the case with me, but I do use it more than anything else.
Yeah, and you add a yellow filter to it, though, don't you? That's the way you work with this.
If I'm doing landscape work, I would tend to, because I'm particularly interested in skies. And the change in light, and they give a something that I find very attractive.
But in an interview I saw with you said it's not the obvious choice as a landscape camera, is it really?
No, it's not at all. And I wouldn't even pretend to be able to compete with, a lot of the mainstream, very, very expert photographers shooting landscape on the SLR cameras, because they're different creatures. They perform in a different way. I'm certainly not interested in having thousands of digital options on my camera. I just want to be able to have a minimum amount of settings. I know exactly what I want to try and achieve. Whether I do is a different thing.
Well, you've been very prolific over these last 10 years with exhibitions, with books, displaying your work, going on commissions. And what I think we should start with maybe the fact that you're rather spoiled by the canvas you have on your front door when it comes to landscape. I know you don't call yourself a landscape photographer, but the landscape you live within, you're truly spoiled, because there is much location work to talk about, but these incredible views and scenes that you have on tap of Brighton, it's a place you clearly enjoy working in.
Yes, I mean, I agree with you. We are totally spoiled, and I lived all my working life in London, but we moved to Brighton when I retired, when I was just coming up to retire. And not the only reason, but one of the reasons was because of the opportunities that it would afford for photography. Not only have you got landscape, you've got the maritime aspect, you've got the wonderful South Downs, which are this time of year just breathtaking. And of course, you've got the most vibrant street scene potential, probably, I think, in the country. There's always something going on.
Yeah. Did you share that, by the way, with your wife when you decided to move to Brighton? Did you? I mean,
Yes.
you were honest and said, "Darling, this is a great place photographically," or was that the back of your mind?
No, it was true.
The West Pier is such an iconic structure. It's been photographed so many times, hasn't it? It's the pier that still juts out of the sea. It's refusing to be blown away. The supports the ironwork. That's the only thing left, of course, after that horrible fire. But I'm always fascinated by photographers who have, and I'm going to use this word, I think, advisedly, a relationship photographically with that structure, which you do. I mean, when you go out to photograph it, though, you're probably at the back of your mind thinking, well, how can I do this differently? Because it's been done so many times.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I sometimes won't go near it because I find a very, very difficult subject to capture in any sort of different way at all.
Yeah.
I might have managed to get 3 or 4 shots that I think, have got somewhere near what I'd like to do. It all depends on the weather and or if there's anything social going on there. If there are parades, events, demos, there might be performers down there. It all depends. But I mean, there are so many different ways of shooting it. I've tried, but I've never succeeded shooting it properly at night time.
There's a challenge then. Yeah.
There's a challenge.
There's a West Pier Foundation. I can't remember what they call themselves, and they of course have worked with you on, I think, one of the exhibitions that you did.
Called West Pier Trust.
West Pier Trust. That's it. Does that mean that there's some sort of force of they're trying to put the pier up again? Then is that the intention?
It's a political minefield.
Yeah, I bet.
The whole issue of rebuilding a pier in that location, and anything I say about it's, I'm sure, going to be incorrect. Let's say that there have been many attempts to move that forward. It's still going on. The West Pier Trust is a charity which I believe is ultimately owned by Brighton and Hove Council, and their mission is to increase awareness of the West Pier and also to develop and install a visitor centre adjacent to the West Pier as a first stage.
Yeah. We're back with John Brockles in a moment. Now, if you make films, slideshows or podcasts, you might like to know that the incredible music that's the creative glue between features and guests is from a royalty-free website and music library called artlist.io, and you will find a link through our website to them. So if you need music and you want to pay just one charge in the year to use hundreds upon hundreds of songs across all your projects, from YouTube through to weddings, through to podcasts and commercial jobs, this is what I personally recommend, and I use it day after day after day. Link is on the website. And just before we return to John then, a reminder that we're walking again ourselves on Friday when we take on a photo walk. The show's very much driven on Fridays by your feedback to the guests that you hear, your own photo stories, and just how you feel when you are out there making pictures. So send your mails to studio@photographydaily.show so that I can feature you in the mailbag edition, which is the Friday Photo Walk. On that note, remember, you can also send in pictures from your own photo walks to appear on the episode's show page online with links to your website or Instagram if you send them in. Right, back to John Brockles. Let's talk about the projects, John. First up, it's a concept I've started talking about with some photographers of late about how they think up their projects. As I say, you've been prolific. Where do your ideas come? Like, is it life experience or a notepad with 1,000 things you'd like to photograph and places you'd like to go to, or do they organically develop from, say, a walk along the seafront, or how do they come about?
They come about over time. I don't sit down and sort of coldly work out what I want to do. It's usually triggered by an interest, and then I'll suddenly realise I've got the germs of something here, and then follow it through. But I mean, conversely, with the Camino project I've just finished, that was based on the fact that I'd always, throughout the whole of my life, wanted to actually go and walk this route. But with that thought in mind, I had become very interested in the whole concept of pilgrimage in the modern world. What does it mean in the modern world? Is it still relevant? And that's what led me to that project. And because I had I could only do this in a set amount of time, I did, in a way, cram it all into a 3-week period.
Angelica Schneider was the photographer we talked to, a former guest who walked the Camino Santiago. It's a long pilgrimage. I mean, you can make it as long as you wish. I think some people walk from Holland and as far away as Germany, yeah. I think, to this. But
yeah, they do.
Yeah, but you were with your manageably sized rangefinder, just the one of them. How far did you walk, John? What was the?
Well, I didn't walk from
Germany.
From Germany. No. I did meet someone who'd walked from Belgium, though.
Wow.
Which I was fairly impressed with, very impressed with. And I have met someone who's walked from his home in Sussex.
Good heavens.
Walked out front door, went on the South Downs Way, walked to
ferry
Winchester,
ferry
down
across.
to Portsmouth, on a ferry, off you go.
Oh, my word. That's extraordinary.
In answer to your question, I walked half of one of the routes, which is called the Camino Frances.
Right.
Which starts very near the Spanish border in France. And I walked it from the city of Leon, which is halfway along, effectively, the northern part of Spain. And I walked for, I think it was 314 kilometres, or call it 200 miles.
Fair way. Did you do it as a walk or did you do it as a photographic project?
Honest answer, with two hats on.
Right.
I did it as a photographer. I went with the very clear intention that if I could get enough pictures, I wanted to write a book about it, because in preparing for it, I was convinced that I had not found a photo reportage showing me what it would be like to walk that route. And a lot of people want to walk it, but age catches up with them and they can't. And I felt it would be a worthwhile achievement if I could show people, from a photographer's point of view, what the experience was like.
So it's almost like a physicality guidebook.
Yeah, in a way. And the other reason is that I had by then become sufficiently interested in pilgrimage, whilst although, let's say, faith itself isn't an issue for me, it wasn't the driver, but I did actually find the prospect of undertaking it as a pilgrim, for many reasons, to be something I wanted to do.
And what's it like with the people that walk along the way? Is there sort of a camaraderie, or it's such a long walk? I dare say you're not walking with people all the time. There must be some fairly some moments of solitude, I'm sure.
Yeah, there are. I chose to go there on my own deliberately because it would force me more than normal to talk to people.
Yeah.
And in fact, people have, recognised that, and there's a great feeling of friendship. And of course, you get the opportunity to meet so many people you would never ever meet from all over the world, from different cultures, different religions, different mindsets. And I just found the whole process fantastic.
And I wonder whether having a camera with you does help you in that social aspect, because when you've got a camera with you, and a lot of the work is, there's an air of street photography about this, John. I mean, I know we're not in built-up streets and cities, and this can be in the countryside, but there's an air of street photography, an air of people photography about it, which means that you're forcing yourself really to need to communicate, aren't you?
Yes. I mean, I'm always careful not to impose myself on anyone and not to intrude. The other thing I did, which was a very important decision for me, I decided that if I was going to do this, I would travel as a pilgrim and I would stay in the traditional pilgrim hostels. They're very, very basic, incredibly basic. It's just bunk beds. And I went on the understanding that you turn up, and if they've got room for you, you're in. If not, then you've got to keep walking.
Otherwise, it's just you and your Leica M9 sleeping under the stars.
Well, a lot A lot of people do that.
I'm fascinated, by the way. I mentioned this to Angelica because she had a picture of it, and you do too. People seem to leave their boots along the trail, and I wonder what are they doing? Are they just walking on with bare feet, or
what's going on? I have no idea.
There's pictures of boots all of the way along the trail.
They're everywhere. Unless I often wondered whether they're people who actually gave up.
Oh, and got the taxi back.
I think that could well be the case.
Golden State. I want to come to that project. Is a fantastic example of. I think it's alone time as well. I mean, you've mentioned the alone time that you spent on the trail, the Camino. Is Golden State the same? Because it's a very quiet project, isn't it?
Yes, I shot this almost exclusively in California about 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And my wife and I went there together, and we just hired a car, and for about 10 days went to some of the locations I went to as a student photographer. When I was studying photography, I spent about 12 weeks traveling around the United States from coast to coast. And I went back to some of the sites that I photographed with my little Kodak then, which I've still got in these negs.
Oh, wonderful.
And also went to some of the sites like Death Valley, which I had always wanted to go to, but never went to on the earlier trips. And it was quite fascinating. On one location in particular, a ghost town called Bodie.
I saw it, yeah.
Which I've got some of the buildings I've still got in this book, in my contact sheets, and I've almost got the same angles. There's nearly 50 years between the two shoots. I was
going to say how many years between. So 50 years between. And had the buildings changed much?
Not much.
Wow.
Not much.
Had they been claimed by the land more, perhaps?
No, it's a very, very high altitude location.
It's very arid.
And it's covered in snow most 8 months of the year. And it's a protected site. When I first went there, the ground was just strewn with artifacts. Tin cans, cartwheels, whole load. It was a mining community, second only in size to San Francisco in California. So it had a population of about 30,000 people.
And now it's empty.
And the gold and silver ran out, and they just left. And because it was in a remote location, it was easier to leave the stuff behind than to try and take it all with you.
That would be a fascinating project, wouldn't it, to put together those pictures side by side now?
Yeah. I've got enough of them to do it.
Yeah. What's your view with the work? Is it to produce books or exhibitions? I know you like to see your work come to life in sort of a more tangible, tactile form. Is that the plan that you have whenever you're working? I mean, perhaps having something left in your hand is the driver behind you as a photographer, and I suppose in your previous life as a graphic designer.
Partly driven by my work as a designer. I ended up working almost exclusively for historic visitor attractions. And a lot of the work I did was visitor interpretation, helping visitors to understand the buildings that they were visiting or the landscapes they were looking at, which may be different to the landscapes that they're known for through history. And at the bottom of all of this is the aspect of storytelling, of telling stories. And I think that's what's driving my photography more than anything else, to try and tell stories by putting together a collection of images that both work one to another, but also work across time. So I find that I go back to some locations time and time and time again, because they're never the same. Well,
I suppose that's easy to do when you're in Brighton, and I know that I know your street work in Brighton, etc. But you do go further afield, as with the project we just talked about. There's but there's also places like the Firewalk, which is a wonderful study, that one, isn't it?
Well, it's kind of you to say so. That was a walk I did in Iceland.
Yeah.
I didn't do it on the spur of the moment. I made a quite quick decision to go there because it was a landscape I knew about. I suddenly found that it was possible. I should have realised before, I could go there and engage the services of a professional guide, join a small group of about I think we were a dozen people, and a guide would take us through the wilderness on a very extended walk. I think I walked for 8 days there, but it was, in terms of distance, nothing like the Camino. It was much shorter in distance, but of course you're traveling up and down all the time. And we stayed in very, very isolated mountain huts. That's the first time I did something like that. And of course, I learned a lot. And one of the things I learned was don't take 4 lenses, 2 camera bodies, umpteen chargers, batteries, because it nearly killed me.
The travel aspect of your work is really important. But equally, I know that, Shoreline, which we talked about and touched on, you have a real affinity for photographing the sea, don't you? It seems to me you're never happier than when you're next to it. That's where I see the most peace in your pictures.
Yeah, you're right. You've got that spot on.
But you're also a sea angler as well. So
I am also a sea angler. Now, a lot of people will now turn off.
No, not at all. We're not just about to start talking about angling, but
no, we won't talk about angling.
But I know nothing about angling. This is certainly not an angling show. But
No.
but you do. But the sea is what draws you photographically. Yeah. I think.
Yeah, and for about 35 years, with a group of friends, we charter a big boat off. It tends to be the west coast of Scotland.
Yeah.
For a week. I've just come back from that this year. And for about the last 10 years, I've always taken my cameras out to sea.
I hope in some kind of housing.
It's quite dodgy, can be very dodgy. It's there's with the salt, and then there's stuff flying around all over the place when it gets hectic, which it can do. It puts you in vantage points for photography that you would never see from the land. And also, because you're out there day after day, the light is constantly changing. The conditions are constantly changing. You've got a golden opportunity to, catch those fleeting moments.
Being a designer, being a photographer through your life, what are the two disciplines brought to you? In particularly, probably photography. But design and photography, they're a happy marriage.
Yeah. Composition, which I think, is crucial to successful design and crucial to successful photography, in my view. So, for instance, I talked about setting myself parameters at the beginning. One of the things I said to myself at the beginning is that I will not crop my photographs. The shot that I print, the shot that goes on the screen, is the composition that I took. I might tweak a horizon. I'll allow myself to do that if necessary.
No wonky horizons, no.
Yeah, but I find it's been successful for me because it makes me think. It makes me think about what I'm doing. And of course, one of the great things about the rangefinder camera is you're not shooting like this.
In other words, you have an available eye not covered by a camera body. So what does that mean to you? What's the advantage for you?
So I can see when a composition is going to happen. Before it happens, I can predict it. But one of the things I was surprised at is that people are left and right-eyed, which I didn't know.
I am. So a rangefinder to me doesn't make any difference. And it is something we talk about quite regularly and reasonably recently, actually, too.
Yes.
Yeah. What's next, John? What's the next project? What are you looking forward to doing now?
People always ask that. I'm not sure.
I'm not going to be the only... Sure. Oh, you're not sure?
I will pursue my student portfolio.
Yeah.
For sure. I've started that already. And I would like to go back to Spain. And I would like to do the other half of the Camino, because I'm sure I can get as much pleasure out of that, and I might get some decent photographs as well as I did on the first half of it.
Not tempted to walk from the South Downs for that one then?
I did stupidly. I did think, I thought it amused me so much. I could easily do that.
My sincere thanks to John Brockles. Back Friday for the Mailbag Show, me with my microphone, you with your earbuds and the smartphone of your choice, and us with our cameras, whatever they are, DSLR, mirrorless, could even be an action camera, I don't know, depends how you walk and what you do, as we spend some time alone walking and photographing. And of course we have some inspirational words from former guests too. If you haven't yet, you can join our private Facebook group and follow us on Instagram. Links to all this and our guests and our wonderful supporters on Patreon will be on the Photography Daily show page today, which is linked to within the podcast player app as always. Music on the show from the incredible artlist.io. And I look forward to photographing with you, hearing from you and talking with you next time.
Photography Daily is a Loading Zone production.